Good evening. It is a rare man whose past does not return to haunt him. My past is about to catch up with me on this very show. If you are interested in watching, you will be treated to a macabre succession of murders, mysteries, and crimes of passion. I freely confess my guilt. This burden of guilt I am pleased to share with you in the program which follows.
If there is one man who embodies everything I think a director should be, I'd have to say it's Alfred Hitchcock. Often considered the master of suspense and highly regarded as the greatest director of suspense or thriller films ever, at least this side of France, Hitchcock is one of the few directors able to make brilliant films without having to break away from the Hollywood system. Mostly because he knew how to cheat that system. And because October is my birth month, my channel is pretty much devoid of content right now, and Hitchc-October sounds cool, I've decided to dedicate every other day in October to a review of a Hitchcock masterpiece, which should bring the total number of reviews to about 15, 16, depending upon how lazy I am. Which is a number of films almost unheard of in any other director's body of work. Similarly respected directors may have 15 or 16 films. If they're especially good, they may even have a watchable set of 15 films. But Hitchcock really does have at least 20 films that are absolute masterpieces. Trying to pick just 15 films is kind of an ordeal, for me at least, and I actually wound up with considerably more than that, so this may spill over into November. With a career that began in Britain with silent pictures as well as very early talkies, and continued up until his death as one of the most respected directors ever to work in Hollywood, Hitchcock wasn't just a great director, he was the equivalent of about 10 great directors rolled into one. And he has the body of work of about 10 great directors to prove it. I despise this idea that Hitchcock is only the master of suspense. Because, while it's a very fitting title, it ignores so much of what he was a master of. There are so many sides to Hitchcock that it just shortchanges him immensely. There's Hitchcock the painter, Hitchcock the comedian, Hitchcock the voyeur, Hitchcock the pornographer, and most underrated of all is Hitchcock the poet. There's this really great shot in Topaz, which is a movie I don't want to review because it's really just a minor Hitchcock, but it does have this really great sequence where the Cuban villain shoots the spy in the resistance, and her dress becomes the pool of blood. It's such a beautiful visual metaphor that no other word describes it but poetry. One of the great things about Hitchcock's work is that not only is his name all over every one of his movies in terms of visual, stylistic, and narrative elements, but his actual presence is in every film. There's at least one walk-on in every Hollywood Hitchcock, and there's usually one in some of his late British talkies. In my mind, they're some of the best touches that are apparent to the casual viewer. His movies also have these really great silent sequences in them because he started out in silent pictures and really mastered the medium quickly. They're sort of like his cameos. There's one or more in just about every one of his films, and they're some of the best scenes to see in a theater because people will literally not make a noise until they're over. They'll actually hold their breath until the scene is finished. One of the best examples of these silent scenes can be found in the movie Marnie. There's this really great sequence when Tippi Hedren's character is stealing these files from the office and the cleaning guy is just getting into work. It's one of my all-time favorite scenes to watch in a theater because no one makes a sound when it's happening. Now, you can't talk about Hitchcock films without using the word suspense. His movies pretty much just ooze it. And it really is something that he brought to the film and not the writer. If you actually sit down and read one of the screenplays to his movies, aside from them being just sort of mediocre, there are so many scenes which are so much more gripping in the final product. One of the best is in the remake of The Man Who Knew Too Much. Jimmy Stewart and Doris Day are in the hotel room and there's this man in the shadows that comes in to talk to them. In the screenplay, it's very just casual and ordinary, but in the movie, it's this terrific moment which still kind of terrifies me. Pauline Kael, who's one of the all-time great film critics despite having the noticeable handicap of being slightly insane, has this really great article titled Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and one of the central ideas in that is that one of the most basic pleasures of the movies is that we either get to watch people fall in love with each other or kill each other. And to expand on that a little, I think the great movies are ones that either give us both of those or that blur the line between them so well that we can't tell which one we're watching. Personally, I think that the latter half is the superior in terms of artistic merit, and Hitchcock is one of the all-time best at blurring the line between sex and violence in his films. Now, when I call him stuff like Hitchcock the pornographer, that's not to insult him or imply that his movies are smutty. It's to bring attention to the fact that there are a lot of sexual overtones and undertones in his movies. Sometimes they're just very typical boy meets girl ones, like in To Catch a Thief, where Grace Kelly offers Cary Grant a breast or a thigh.
You want a leg or a breast?
Know what I mean? Nudge, nudge.
Other times they're a little more demented, and they'll actually frighten the audience as well. Like the shower scene in Psycho. Watch it without the knife shots and tell me it doesn't look like one hell of a rape scene. Even back when Hitchcock films were new, they were still considered sexualized and pretty violent. But I think modern audiences are able to appreciate how well he masked and visually implied a lot of the darker elements in his stories than audiences in Hitchcock's own era were able to. It's actually kind of shocking just how many sexual implications and how much sexual imagery is in the typical Hitchcock film. I think it's one of the most feral and intense pleasures people get out of Hitchcock films, whether they realize it or not. The other big sexual, I guess you'd call them deviations in Hitchcock, are his impotent, his Oedipal and Electra complex ridden, and his homosexual characters. I'll go into all this more when I get to each specific film, but it's really hard to watch Rear Window without noticing that the Jimmy Stewart and the Raymond Burr characters are both impotent.
Those bathing beauties you've been watching haven't raised your temperature 1 degree in a month.
And that's why the women are the ones going between the apartments and not the men. Now, The Birds and Notorious are both about Oedipal/Electra complexes, and that's what makes everything go awry. Especially in The Birds, nature literally suffers as a result of the Oedipal complex. Homosexuality is another one of the big sexual themes that shows up in Hitchcock films. Unfortunately, it usually shows up as the homosexual as a monster kind, which has really gone out of style in recent years. But that particular perversion is a big part of the films where Hitchcock collaborated with actor Farley Granger. Those two are Strangers on a Train and Rope. There are other movies that have homosexual implications, but those two are really the ones where it's most essential to the understanding of the film. And then, ironically, some of the least sexual aspects of a Hitchcock film are his icy blonde leading ladies. Usually they're played by some of the most well-known actresses in Hollywood at the time, most notably Ingrid Bergman and Princess Grace Kelly. Now, some have attributed this to a personal affection Hitchcock had for blonde women. However, he himself claimed that ever since the days of Mary Pickford, blonde women have been synonymous with film heroism. In some ways, he is definitely onto something there. We really didn't get that many brunette or red-headed movie stars until the Technicolor era. Although I do think some of his choice came from the way that blonde women just photographed better in black and white. Because of the lighting, blonde women kind of get this luminous and almost angelic quality in black and white films, and it's something that we've really lost with the dominance of color. However, I have to admit there's kind of a correlation-causation thing going on here. Hitchcock films have definitely had an impact on blonde women in the popular imagination, especially when it comes to film. Hitchcock also seemed to have a social phobia. There's a lot of times in his late English films when a character will arrive at a social meeting or a party and it actually turns out to be a trap or a place where the main character is humiliated. The 39 Steps has a really fantastic party sequence which turns out to be a trap for the main character. But the best is probably in the last act of Saboteur, where the main character is able to turn the tables on his captors at their own party after he gets himself and his blonde companion trapped by Nazis. As for his visual style, Hitchcock really liked to get tight angles of things, usually parts of the human body that weren't typically shown in close-up. Shots of hands, knees, and sometimes even backs are used in Hitchcock films. The other thing he really likes to do is take a low-angle shot from atop a high place. Some of his best shots are taken from those low angles. The finale of North by Northwest, most of the great sequences in Vertigo, and that really great low-angle shot atop the Statue of Liberty in Saboteur. For me, Hitchcock has always been the bridge between sort of the high art film and the movies that just sort of exist to kill time. I think he's the first director that we watch and start to take his films seriously as art, unless you watch Citizen Kane as part of an aesthetics class. Most of his work has elements that are exciting to just about any audience, like an explosion or a sexy blonde woman, but he also has a lot of artistic nuance that you really have to see his films and start to study them before you can understand it all. Alfred Hitchcock is one of those exceedingly rare directors who appeals to both the casual audience member as well as serious film buffs. So go out and grab yourself a copy of Saboteur, The 39 Steps, The Lady Vanishes, The Birds, Rebecca, Marnie, Shadow of a Doubt, Suspicion, The Man Who Knew Too Much, the remake, Dial M for Murder, Rope, Strangers on a Train, Spellbound, To Catch a Thief, The Trouble with Harry, Notorious, Rear Window, Psycho, and Vertigo. And let's watch some Hitchcock. Just be sure you don't fall in love with a double agent, witness a murder, break your leg, fall from a tall structure, have a crazy eyeball dream, or burn your house down. And I promise, it's going to be one hell of a month.